So we have people trickling in. We'll stop talking about crows and Norse mythology, and start talking about important contemporary topics. Not that those aren't important topics as well, but I'm here with Helen Pluckrose. Helen, it's great to connect like this. Good to see you.
You. Thanks for having me on. Yes, so sorry about the last time having to back out at the last minute, but I am well now.
Good. You look well, so that's good. Yeah, all good. It's this is a good time as well. Um, so the reason I wanted to talk, Helen, is because I really enjoyed your recent articles about the rise of the woke right, right? And I want to get into that term and unpacking it a bit. I thought it would be interesting first, before we do that, for any viewers who aren't familiar with your work, I think it's quite important to place it within, let's say, maybe we could begin with the grievance studies affair, because I think that gives a context to your work right now and your analysis of what's going on the right. So maybe you could give us a summary of what was the grievance studies affair.
Well, that was the stage that I called showing the problem to exist, because at that time there was a rise of what has now become called the critical social justice movement, or more commonly known as woke, and this activism was very closely connected to a form of scholarship in critical theories of race, queer theory, post-colonial theory. So we wanted to show that a lot of this scholarship was very poor quality, and so James Lindsay, Peter Boghossian, and I wrote 21, I think it was, papers in total, 22, and that were really using the worst. We brought together the worst. Least ethical, least evidence based theories, put them together, made ludicrous and unethical arguments with them, got 7 of them published in the journals that we were concerned about. 7 more were under revise and resubmit when we got found. And we were just at that point, we were trying to say to well-intended liberal lefties, look, we know the social justice is a good thing. We're with you on that, but you really have to have a little more critical analysis of what's coming out of scholarship now, because it's not helping.
Yeah, and it's I remember at that time when we were doing Rebel Wisdom, my previous project, and for us it was a really important moment. I think it was quite a kind of watershed moment culturally, and to kind of place myself within this debate. My stance on this, over the years has been similar to you. Like, I actually did a lot of critical theory in university, and I find value in it. And however, my argument was that what became critical social justice theory and the way it got integrated into the institutions was more like a religion than it was a form of theoretical understanding. My argument, I wrote a piece called Sleeping Woke 4 or 5 4 years ago maybe, and the main argument I made was that it was not quite a religion, but what I called a simulated religion. It had a lot of the hallmarks of religion. And I actually think it had now, in retrospect, a lot of the hallmarks of a kind of Lutheranism, right? There's Lutheranism and this kind of idea that people are inherently damned through their whiteness or through their broken view on whatever it might be on the world, on power dynamics, and damned and yet only able to redeem themselves through some kind of active clarity which is always beyond them. So this can never be fully redeemed. That was my stance on it. And my argument has always been that there's very important critiques of power in social justice theory that really get captured and warped when they enter the institution. So I mean, I wonder if what you make of that kind of stance before we go on.
Well, I'm not a fan of the critical theories at all, really. So
Mhm.
when as they arose, we have in the late 1960s. I generally start there because it is all roads lead back to Foucault with our current thing. Much
Mhm.
the Frankfurt School or the Marxist tradition. And I think when this came up then, and it was talking about looking at power, at systems of knowledge, how knowledge is constructed, how it's perpetuated in language. And what is, I think, very most infuriating is that it presents this as though nobody's ever thought of that before, as though
Mhm.
we didn't have a sort of a system of critical thought before that, as though liberalism had not arisen, it had not argued strongly for freedom of speech, the free exchange of ideas, the marketplace of ideas, for looking at systems of power and privilege, for challenging them. It had not overcome systems of class, of patriarchy, of slavery, colonialism. That these hadn't been challenged, and instead we need to step right away from the empiricism. We need to see progress as a myth, and we need to start deconstructing everything that we know to be true, or we're working on the hypothesis that it seems to be true. It's always a work in progress, and it was very cynical, and it kind of locked itself into certain findings straight away. I thought, because it came from a left with it was mostly disillusioned Marxists, wasn't it? And I think a lot of the feeling was, well, Marxism has quite clearly failed in communist regimes, and if we can't count on that, can we count on anything? And then trying, kind of sitting there in this spirit of disillusionment. And this then went on until about 89, 90, when we got the next wave of critical theorists in critical race theory, queer theory, who were saying, okay, we can't just sit here having deconstructed everything with it in a mess on the floor. We need to start reconstructing the things. And this was where we got the idea that what is real is oppression. This is how Kimberly Crenshaw put it. Is that, okay, so race and sex and everything else is a social construct, but what is real is the systems of power and oppression that rise up around it. So we need to get rid of liberalism, and we need to apply the politics of the new left and postmodern theory, and that will help somehow. And I don't think it has, and since 2010 it's solidified via intersectionality into a sort of general theory of social justice, which is now really a meta narrative. The worth, I think, in thinkers like Foucault, like Derrida, like Lyotard, was in having a skepticism of meta narratives. But now we have this very simple meta narrative of critical social justice.
There's this quote from Lyotard that I read and cannot find again, but I swear he said it. And maybe someone out there can find it. I'm forever searching for it, where he said, if we keep, effectively, to paraphrase, if we have this kind of endeavor of deconstruction is fine as long as you have the sublime. And so if people aren't familiar with it, the sublime is this moment in the Romantic era where you would encounter something that was so beyond the language games that it rendered them all meaningless, because it was an encounter with a deeper sense of connectedness and reality. And I've always had that sense that you cannot deconstruct if there's nothing to fall back into. You can't deconstruct without something to deconstruct into. Otherwise, it's madness. I mean, that is in some ways kind of a schizophrenic mindset. There's total fragmentation, but there's really no cohesive unity to fragment into. And I feel like that was at its very worst. That's what it felt like in, say, maybe 2017, 2018. And so you were living through that as an academic and beating the drum of, how do we get out of this madness effectively? Now, things have changed since then quite significantly culturally now, and we're getting on to, the main topic I want to talk about, but maybe you could talk about what has changed since, say, the peak of it till now in 2025.
Yeah, we hit peak woke in the spring of 2020. And what a lot of critics of wokeness had been saying was that at that point it was really quite evident people were getting cancelled. There were demonstrations on university campuses, social media dog piles, but it was still mostly bubbling up under the surface in enclosed environments ranging from knitting to young adult books, destroying them from within, and or focusing on one particular celebrity, one particular university campus in quite localized explosions. But it was waiting to implode on a larger scale. And then I don't think it's a coincidence that the time it did that was shortly after COVID lockdowns had begun. This is something that we see repeatedly throughout history. A plague strikes and people are frightened. They want something to fight, something that tangible that they can get their hands on. During the Black Death, for example, Jews were often targeted. This was when there have been pogroms, and that kind of, there's an enemy, we must fight it. And so when George Floyd died at the knee of a police officer known for using excessive force, that was the touch paper. And after that, when the protests happened and some of them became violent and destructive, and then people were really getting quite freaked out by it, a lot of businesses all started taking on training programs that were based largely in Robin DiAngelo and her beliefs that we are all inevitably socialized into white supremacy. We have to affirm our own racism, then dismantle it in our own minds. But I was also getting hearing from people on the subject of gender and the decolonize everything movement. And I was getting hundreds of emails a day at that point because I'd written Cynical Theories, which was breaking down those the problems there. And then people writing to me. Then I formed Counterweight to try and filter people into different groups, try and help people not to get cancelled. The evidence now seems to be showing that this explosion was a kind of cathartic one. So in 2021, since then, we've seen promising signs of wokeness decreasing on a cultural level. It's not being used as much in mainstream outlets. They're becoming more able now to criticize some of the woke ideas. In corporations' communications, we're seeing less of the words diversity, equity, inclusion, racial justice. We're seeing a shift away from that language. Students have reported feeling more able to speak. So I think we are seeing the wane, but we should not feel complacent about that, because as it was rising, it did a lot of harm. As it's waning, it's going to take a long time, I think. It's going to take years. It's waning is not gone. So, but and there's going to be death throes. So we're seeing that. But at the same time, we have seen the backlash coming from the anti woke. And the anti woke are a mixed bunch, because really at its broadest, anything that is anti can come from any positive belief system. So I have considered myself anti woke because I criticize wokeness, but I'm coming very much from the liberal um, position, whereas other people can be coming from all range of positions, from gender critical feminists, colloquially known as TERFs, to social conservatives, right to ethno nationalists. So people being opposed to woke can have a number of reasons for this. And what we were always very worried about and wrote about was that the breaking down of an understanding that to evaluate people by their race was to be both stupid and unethical, and to have be authoritarian about how what people do with their sex lives, how they choose to present, is was just discrimination, prejudice. Just leave people alone unless they're hurting you. So, but when we have had this, the critical theories of race being combined with black people, conflated with them, this is the authentic voice of black people. Black people, meanwhile, were overrepresented, coming to Counterweight saying no, it isn't. The all gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans identifying people are represented by LGBT activism and garish flags and queer theory. They also large numbers saying, no, that's not. I just attracted to people of the same sex. And so we've got this conflation and the backlash as it has come, the rule of understanding that racism, sexism, homophobia is stupid and beneath us has been broken down to a certain extent. And then we have people who, in the name of anti-wokeness, are not actually attacking adherence to critical social justice theory. They are conflating them with the groups that they claim to represent, and so we get a lot of anti-black, anti-woman, anti-gay sentiment that is coming up, and we're seeing this particularly in the US, where support for same-sex relationships has dropped 7 points in the last year. Maybe that was a year before this year, and 14 points on Republicans' side. We're seeing an increase in overtly racist and misogynistic accounts as well on social media and in mainstream discourse, and people are just conflating. I saw one good example was of a black man, a shirtless black man, trying to do a difficult skiing trick, and he fell. And this was by a leading conservative American pundit, diversity on the slopes. This isn't diversity. This is an individual who happens to be black, trying to do a stunt and falling. But people, because she'd said diversity, not a black man. This wasn't racist. This was anti woke, and this is what we're seeing now with this backlash that is coming. There's a real anger at the woke movement, which is understandable, but its punches are very sloppy and it's taking on a lot of the same identity politics. We're having white identity politics. We're having straight identity politics. We're having Western ethno-nationalist identity politics now, which are the same as this is why they're called the woke right. They're doing the same things as the woke left, and they're just, well, this is bad. No, this is good. Smash.
Yeah, yeah, and it's depressingly predictable, I think, that this would happen. And
Mm-hmm.
I think a model I find very useful for understanding this kind of phenomena is from Ken Wilber, the philosopher Ken Wilber, and he has this model called the pre-trans fallacy. Nothing to do with trans in the way we might understand it, but his argument is that if you imagine that there's an evolution of sophistication or complexity in positions we might hold. So we start with the pre-conventional, and let's use a good example is always relationships, right? So the pre-conventional is like when you're not really able to have relationships, you're entirely dependent, like a child, right? So that's dependence. Then you have the conventional, which is, you know what? I'm my own person, I've individuated, and I'm not dependent on anyone. I'm my own person. And then as you evolve as a person, you realize that sometimes in life, you are, of course, dependent on other people because we're all part of a community and you don't want to be codependent, you don't want to be overly dependent. But if you were to ask someone, is dependence a part of relationship? They would say yes. So you get the same answer in the pre move dependence, yes. The conventional is dependence, no. And the trans conventional is, well, yes and no, really, but it also includes a yes. His argument is that we conflate the pre-trans fallacy is where people conflate the simplicity of something, and it's happening with wokeness as well, and it gets completely, everything gets thrown into the same box, everything gets pulled into the same basket, and you get this very poor sense making where people aren't able to hold the complexity of human experience, which is, and for me part of it is that, I sympathize a lot with the more traditional Marxist view on these, and people like Adolf L. Reed and Yanis Varoufakis or Slavoj Zizek, who point out that the focus on identity really shielded politics from focusing on class, the real major driver of inequality. Now, even that being the case, it doesn't mean that identity is not an important aspect of human experience. It doesn't mean that black people or women, don't experience oppression based on the way they look or who they are or uncontrolled characteristics. But my stance has always been that it's a much broader, complex system of influences on power, which is the main focus of critical theory, there's attractiveness, there's class, there's race, there's all these. In a way, intersectionality was never intersectional enough. It never was complex enough to bring in all of the myriad things that actually, the way someone's dressed, for example, and also a major factor. So, what do you make of that kind of? Yeah.
Of course, it shifts from environment to environment. In a lot of places, we might find, for example, that there's an advantage to being white. In other places, there might be an advantage to being black, and we can kind of test this by looking at where are people who can pass as white, pretending to pass as white, where are people who can pass as black, pretending to pass as black, and we see that in universities and in activist spaces, there have been some white activists who have laid claim to an Indigenous Black identity that students applying for various for courses have suddenly discovered a mixed race identity. So we can see that in this particular system, it's probably not an advantage to be white. Whereas if you worked in many other fields, particularly sort of day-to-day working life, you might well be advantaged for being white in a white majority society. That it doesn't have that nuance, as you say. It doesn't have. I mean, nuance is the wrong word because that's kind of wafty. The granularity
Yeah.
that to look at whether something is working for you or against you, whether the system is it needs adjusting.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to get into the granularity, let's say it's a nice word, of the woke right a bit, because this is really what your two recent pieces really delved into, and I think they're quite important. I'm going to read just a quote from one of them, so that you said that a stark division is revealed between those who oppose wokeness primarily because it was authoritarian and being institutionalized, and those who opposed it because it was the wrong kind of authoritarian and wanted to institutionalize something else. So on that last point, what are you noticing in the woke right? What are you seeing that there's a desire to institutionalize now?
We're seeing a wish to go backwards. So there in the US particularly, there are people who just want to get rid of the Civil Rights Act. Now, some of the libertarians have said, well, this denies freedom of association, and there are ethical arguments for this. Okay, that's still within the liberal thing. But for a lot of people, there's a feeling that trying to give everybody a sort of level playing field was a problem to begin with, that this is where wokeness came from, this is their justification anyway, and that we should never have expected people to be colourblind to go with merit. We should have just let people divide as they see fit, and not even tried to promote the idea of meritocracy and treating people as an individual. We're seeing a rise of a very sort of gender conservative trad life people who are saying that everything is the fault of the feminization of society, and it's because women have taken positions in cultural power, and that we all really need to get back to the kitchen and have lots of children, and stop thinking and talking so much in public. And then we have people conflating authoritarian trans activism with same-sex couples, gender non-conforming people, liberal trans people who are just trying to live their lives and not impose anything on anybody. And there is not that granularity. We have white identity politics now. We're seeing quite mainstream characters. I saw it again today. Elon Musk retweeted it, asking why is it that white people are the only people who have to be diverse? Why can't white people have a homeland? Why can everybody else have one? The answer to that is everybody. No, nobody in the world apart from what Liberia, I think has a rule that everybody has to be a particular race, but there's this idea that self-victimizing systematic oppression belief. It's presented that some outside force is making European nations, in particular, it wants to disrupt the white majority, it wants to replace them all. For some, they believe the Jews are behind it, and the white people are the victims of this, and it's all very dark and twisted. When in reality, people are moving about to where wealth and opportunity is. There is nothing to
Mm.
stop anybody from moving to Nigeria. You just have to apply for a visa, show that you're worth you're going to be worthwhile there, and they will be more than happy to have you, because we keep brain draining them. But this idea that there is a system, this need to be a victim at the bottom of the system and speak truth to power, is exactly the same as we saw with the woke, except now, rather than saying it, these systems are white supremacy, patriarchy, imperialism. They're going to be the elites, the Jews, possibly the sort of big organisations, the globalists, and they're all trying to keep down these innocent white people, men, heterosexuals. It's just a mirror image.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just really a repeat of history, without oversimplifying it. You get this kind of grievance politics in Weimar Germany, or in the lead up to Hitler. And it's yeah, it there's a sense of really profound insecurity underneath it, and at the same time there's a real grievance, I think, which is of the loss of a cultural identity in the UK or Europe. And so, but again, there's a deep complexity to that. I wrote a piece about the rise of the far right in Europe a few months ago, and one of the things I was arguing is that what we need is, again, this level of complexity where we can simultaneously honor all different types of identity in a culture, and also honor the indigenous identity of a particular culture without shitting all over the other people in the culture who are already there. That's the thing. My argument was, the people are already here. Already, culture is always this melting pot of divergent views, divergent cultures meeting together. And so there is something of, I don't know, for me, I often think that it's a deeply fear-based and insecure response to change, because you can have all those things. You can, for example, I'm half Irish and half German. I play traditional Irish music in pubs, right? I've been playing for 20 years, and it is the whitest pursuit one could ever imagine. There's like, it's a really culturally homogenous pursuit, which is also super welcoming of anyone else who wants to play. But there's just a kind of sense where, like, yeah, like we're doing this thing that's part of our unique culture. No one's trying to stop us. We're not oppressed. We're really welcoming if someone else wants to come in. It's lovely if someone else comes in, but it's just, there's a natural ebb and flow of, cultures will still do their culturally homogenous activities together. So what do you think? I mean, what do you think underlies the sort of grievance politics aspect of the woke right?
Well, I think, as you have said, that there are legitimate grievances there. It has been very difficult for people to raise concerns about immigration policy, to raise concerns about Islamism, and how compatible conservative Muslim views are with the rights of women, same sex attracted people. To have any concerns about this at all is often to be accused of racism. And the same with the authoritarian trans activism. People who have no wish to prevent trans people from just living their own lives can be accused of transphobia, because they don't see trans women as literally women, and they won't agree to pretend that they do. And the pathologization of men, I think, is a genuine problem. We're seeing a real rise in young men of socially conservative beliefs, of rigid gender roles, a divergence between young men and women. There's an increase in a strange mix. We were talking about this the other day, of adherence to Catholicism and martial arts, and this kind of stoical trying to get back to some kind of sense of solidity and a place. And this hasn't been looked at. What as women have been able to join more in the public sphere really have the choices that they want. There's been a lot of focus on where women's place are. There hasn't been one on where men's are, and then we see outright pathologization, such as from the American Psychological Association, where they're looking at more masculine typical traits like competitiveness, stoicism, um, assertiveness as inherently toxic. When of course we know that in their best form their character traits that are found in defensive and emergency services. In their negative, they are certainly found in violence. In the vast majority of men, they're found in liking football and other sports, and being more being less inclined to emotionally express it. And there's a very healthy balance there which hasn't been allowed. So I think there is a grievance on the part of a lot of men who have been informed that there is something intrinsically wrong with masculinity, on the behalf of some white people who are being told that whiteness is inherently oppressive, and that if you are white, then there's a problem with you. That says we've seen only the other day, we now want to decolonize Shakespeare, according to the Trust in Stratford on Avon, and Shakespeare is universal humanist. This feeling of attack on a real staple of English history is felt very strongly by conservatives and by me. I'm economically, but I'm quite conservative of traditions and history and literature. So people are pushing back at something. It is real. To deny that there's anything to feel aggrieved about would be to belittle genuine evidenced experience. But at the same time, there's not a pushback at the right in the right place. We need to criticise the identity politicking, critical social justice woke activists who are trying to impose an extreme view on everybody. But as such a minority of the population, we need to make sure that people can raise concerns, that we can worry about male suicide, that we can worry about ineffective immigration policies and people integrating, that we can worry about authoritarian trans activism and things being taught in schools without being accused of any kind of prejudice. We need to be able to do that. But this is then morphing into an attack on black people, on immigrants, on white people, on LGBT people, and that is where the backlash comes. That the pendulum swings. It does not hit the activists. It takes out innocent bystanders.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. And having run men's circles and done a lot of men's retreats over the years, this impossible um this impossible kind of dynamic that men face, I think I see very often, and I think also has a lot to do with the what I call like the psychologization of society, where in the absence of religion, I think psychology, what's in therapy speak, and psychological concepts have become so dominant. And those, I've heard a lot of men say like that way of understanding oneself is more feminine than it is masculine, because women, as the phrase goes, women connect face to face, men connect shoulder to shoulder. And there is something of masculinity which was very beautiful and powerful, which is more stoic and is more like, men can be honest and in touch with their feelings and then also get over it. That's as women can too, right? But there is something that where it's missing in the culture. And to be honest, most of the men who come to my retreats or workshops are middle class guys who are like, how, they want to better themselves and they care about these things, and they, have good relationships with the women in their lives and loving fathers, but they're just completely and utterly confused about how do we hold this. And again, for me, it comes down to being able to hold complexity of, yeah, I think we're being asked, all of us, men and women, to upgrade what it means to be a human being and be able to hold more context. Because I think a lot of this, the breakdown in the communication, and especially the just outright racism or bigotry that we're seeing now in the sort of anti-woke backlash, it does feel like a complete inability to be able to hold anything more complex than an either or thinking, which is exactly what woke ideology was like, or is like, right? It's again this complete um very disappointing but predictable flip, it feels like.
Yes. I think this does speak to human nature. We do look for a simple narrative of good and evil and something to do, and so that is it shouldn't be surprising to us. I mean, some of the gender critical feminists as well, that bits that are separate to the anti woke, have developed a real authoritarianism, a cry-bully mentality where they're claiming to be harmed if they happen to see a man in a dress at a conference. It's it is a thing I think that humans do when they feel under threat. They retreat into their own groups, and then they're framing themselves as the victims, and but in an aggressive way against what they see as the enemy. And people keep saying to me, have they learned this from the woke? And no, I don't think so. I think we're the most familiar with it with the woke because before that, we were doing fairly well with liberalism, with this idea that we don't descend into these kind of identity politics, but social justice seemed like a good thing, so it's got further. So, in that sense, it has enabled other narratives to arrive at and use that kind of language of aggressive victimhood and explode from its own angles.
Absolutely, yeah. And so, Helen, in the last 10 minutes or so, I think it'd be nice to talk about um, what might we do collectively to, let's say, bring the pendulum swing back into something more compassionate, realistic, expansive. Is it a return to liberal values? Is it something else? Is it, what's your take on it right now? What do you think we need?
I think it has to be liberal values. It has to be liberalism, but not everybody needs to understand this as liberalism or have it at the centre of their moral framework. But this underlying acceptance that we let people believe, live, speak as they see fit, provided they harm no one else, nor deny them the same freedoms. This is something that progressives should be able to get behind because this is how we have achieved so much progress with the development of liberal thought. And it's something that conservatives should be able to get behind because the liberal philosophical tradition is one that is often considered the defining feature of Western civilization. So I think that we should all, depending on where we are politically, the best thing that we can do is address the problems that are around us. So those on the left need to be reaching out to other progressives and trying to get them to come away from identity politics and to continue trying to be progressive, caring about the most vulnerable in an ethical and evidence-based way. And then we need the conservatives to be pushing back at the ethno-nationalists, the rigid social conservatives who want to constrain women and sexual minorities, and saying, no, we are going to conserve our liberal conservative tradition where we treat people as individuals. We focus on personal responsibility, on dignity, on restraint, and we promote those qualities because I see a real problem on the right now, the schism on the right, where we see people who can certainly be described as right and far right even, and they're not at all the same thing as very conservative because that conservative tradition has a long and noble philosophical basis in it that is all about personal responsibility, restraint, dignity, and standing athwart history, yelling stop. It's not standing athwart history yelling burn it all down, I'm a victim. That's not what we see in conservatism. So getting people to really try and strengthen that liberal aim, even if you don't consider it liberal, even if you consider it more of the culture of your own society, or anti-authoritarian or evidence-based or reasoned, just whatever you consider it, that's what we need.
Yeah, that feels very important. What I would add to that, in terms of what I've been looking at recently, is that so much of the grievances that came through, wokeness, and now this kind of woke backlash and the woke right, comes from this a very abstracted view on reality, in which I'm being harmed by some abstract force that's pushing in on me, and of course that's very the internet is an abstracted way of communicating where um ideology and information and symbols are abstracted from human bodies and real situations. That's one of the reasons I think a return to class politics is very important, because it's about who has more, who actually has more opportunity, things, food, etc. I don't think it's the only solution, but there is I think some a very important aspect of coming back into a sense of reality of, microaggressions were a great example, where it's like I'm being harmed because I say I'm being harmed. And it's a question of like, what is harm really? Well, let's actually kind of boil it down into uh, real harm does exist, and people are hurt every day physically. And yes, mental harm, of course, does exist as well. And it's not to completely denigrate that. But the internet is so abstracted that I think it's changed our psychology. And I think there's a job to be done of reconnecting to in-person meetings, town halls, being face to face, where we actually get to connect with one another and realize, oh yeah, I'm not actually hurting you if I disagree with you. I'm not hurting you really. You might be hurt, but that's something for you to hold and deal with.
Yes, I do think that this is something outside of the realm of ideas that I do think is important, and I don't know the solution to. It is about a need to step away from the internet to try to avoid getting sucked into these. And I say this as someone particularly prone to getting sucked into these things.
Me too. Yeah.
Connect with other people, and particularly with our um, young people. I'm quite supportive of the work Jonathan Haidt is doing at the moment of opposing a sort of phone based childhood. I
Definitely.
important. So I'm not quite sure. We're not going to put the internet genie back in the bottle, but we should be able to devise healthier ways to use it, surely.
Absolutely. Yeah. And of course, Substack is excluded from that. You should be on Substack as often as possible, reading all our wonderful work. But Helen, just before we close, is there anything else you wanted to touch on that we didn't get a chance to in the conversation that feels sort of important about this wider topic?
Um, I did want to, when you were speaking before about the difference with the class analysis and the identity analysis, I want to mention for people, even if they don't agree with the sort of socialist idea, an excellent free introduction is Mark James Ledger. Have you seen the book that he edited? And it's called
No.
Social Identity Trumps Socialism, and that is the best and most accessible overview of how identity has taken over class on the left, and what to do about that. And I would really recommend everybody to read that if you're conservative, libertarian, whatever. It's still a really good breakdown of what happened.
Brilliant. That's really handy. I've written that down for myself because it's a favorite topic of mine. So awesome, Helen. Thank you so much, and everyone should check out, if you haven't already, Helen's work in general, but especially the two fairly recent articles about the woke right. Well, Helen, what's the name of those articles again, just as a reminder, so people can kind of find them.
Oh,
The
um,
first one.
I had what is going wrong with the anti woke, and a part two, seriously, what is going wrong with the anti woke, and and then there was, is there an anti woke backlash?
Excellent. Yeah, all worth reading. So Helen, thanks. Keep doing what you're doing, and thanks everyone for tuning in. And hope to see you soon.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you all.